The following is a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio. Want the real story behind the sound bites and headlines? Let's find the facts. Remember, it's not a conspiracy theory if it's the truth. You are not paranoid or confused. You just need to know.
And away we go, everybody, with another edition of Need to Know. Keefer with you on, we're recording on kind of a significant day. And when I say kind of, that is not my intention. On a very significant day. Of course, this is the 22-year anniversary of the 9/11 dastardly attack on not only New York City, which it's kind of remembered predominantly for that, the World Trade Center, resulting in the two towers coming to the ground, but also on the Pentagon and the plane that was coming back with the intent of crashing into the Capitol building. That was really the capper of this story, because by that time, passengers on that flight had discovered what was going on, and they took the step of not on our watch. And that is what Americans need to be mentally and commitment wise, that everybody is a defender of what we have and hold dear in this country. And what they did that afternoon over that field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, to try to retake that plane and prevent these cowardly jackasses from inflicting more damage, is something that is not appreciated enough. The words of the passenger after he talked to his wife and said his probable goodbyes, knowing that the likelihood of success was not the best. Todd Beamer jumped up and told his fellow guys, "Let's roll." And those are words that should live forever in the minds of Americans, because, these guys were put in a position of really extraordinary circumstances. And I really hadn't intended to go this direction, but as we began today, and I want you to know that this discussion is not preconceived in any way. I'm just speaking directly from my heart and my remembrance in this particular circumstance. But when Todd Beamer and those guys had the flight attendant boil hot water in coffee pots and roll a cart up the aisle to basically lead the charge toward the cockpit, which was locked down and secured, the circumstances basically of those guys dousing the person on watch in the front of the cabin with scalding hot water to disable that person and continue to bang into the door to try and gain entry to the cockpit. And we'll never know. All we have in terms of the circumstances are the flight recorders. And as it has become traditional, we still don't have all of those. And that's something you don't hear very much, but they have not released all of that material. What we do have is wild shouting. And so obviously some success was gained in breaching the cockpit, where again, the hijackers were setting dead aim on Washington, D.C., the Capitol building, which would have been as symbolic as the Twin Towers attack was and the attack on the Pentagon. Our Capitol dome, with all the different people in our government occupying that, a session of Congress going on, which at the time was being evacuated because the threat was real and they knew another plane was inbound. But those people and their efforts, and yes, heroic, absolutely, unbelievably heroic. But it needs to be said that I hope that every American in their DNA understands what compelled those people to fight back that day, because they already had their own death sentence announced to them by talking to relatives who were describing what was happening in other places. It didn't take, certainly they had to have known in that moment that if we don't act, we're doomed anyway. Even if this doesn't work, we've got to take the chance. I mean, heroism is not devalued by that, but it was simple common sense. It was a and a fight to survive. And what they did was just extraordinary, because that blow of seeing a plane fly into the Capitol building, I don't know if that symbolism could ever be erased, because that would have been the ultimate blow against our entire system and way of life. So, what Todd Beamer and the other people on that plane did that day is something that I will have admiration for and unbelievable appreciation for what they did to make the ultimate sacrifice to protect their country moving forward. With all that being said, the ceremonies today, and I don't want to be redundant. I don't need to recount in the same tone what you're seeing on network television today. It's highly appropriate, of course, to have people gathered outside of the site of the former Twin Towers, which are now the 9/11 Memorial, and symbolically begin at 9:02 a.m. Eastern Time, reading the names of 3,000 people that perished in these 9/11 attacks. I think about 2,700 of them right there on that very site, and reading those names in alphabetical order, one by one, and at significant times, bells ringing to commemorate, and that's how the ceremony started this morning, to commemorate the time of the first attack, the time of the second plane crashing into the building, which I will have memories of the rest of my life, because I had just started to pay attention to what was happening that began that morning, and on live television, to see what your mind can't even comprehend. You all of a sudden, while they had the camera on the burning tower of the South Tower, all of a sudden you see the image in your mind that seemed like some kind of abstract, but it was clearly another flying object, another plane, although you really didn't grasp that that is exactly what it was. You saw motion at the adjacent tower, and all of a sudden, it became clear that a second plane had just slammed in to that other building, which right away, because there was still a lot of confusion in that first half hour of what the hell was going on. Uh, as always in these situations, there were erroneous reports initially that this was a small plane that had made contact with the World Trade Center. Well, it was anything but a small plane. It was a full-scale jetliner, which had left Logan Airport in Boston, and I think that one was bound for somewhere further west. And then just moments later, another plane that also left Boston Logan that morning hit the South Tower on live television. It's images that I can't shake from my mind when I think about this day, and the appropriateness of what we're seeing on this hour and 45 minutes. That's how long it takes to read all 3,000 names of people who died here and in Shanksville and in Washington, D.C. And don't forget the people on those airplanes. I think that's a group that's not thought about enough, that they were just going about their lives and getting on a plane, and perhaps, maybe they were going to what they thought was going to be a critically important business deal, or they were taking a couple of weeks off to go fly fishing, something they enjoyed, or maybe going to visit a grandchild or their own children or extended family for an event, a wedding, a funeral, whatever it might be. Those people got on the plane. They put their seats upright, their tray tables locked, put on their seatbelt, went through all the instruction, and had no idea that in the midst of them were these, I can't even think of an appropriate word, these maniacs, these completely driven, ideological, brainwashed fools who were going to end their lives and the lives of everybody on those planes. And of course, the lives of so many people at their intended targets. I mean, the sheer evil, the terrible abomination that this was. And every time I hear the word, this was such a tragedy. Yes, the event was a tragedy because of the outcome, but it was not a tragic event that led to this. It was a murderous abomination, a complete disregard for human lives and the opportunity to breathe the air and live the natural course of your own journey. It was abruptly ended by a ancient ideology and a complete unwillingness and just a resentment that this was a country that had the audacity to go a different direction, to not be led by this evil sort of ideology of this is what we believe and this is what you must believe. This country was founded as the antithesis of that. And that's what strikes me thinking back to this day as they read these people's names. Just and it's the way of everything. I understand that, and again, I am not criticizing in any way the observance of this day in this official kind of canned, regularly scheduled, choreographed way, because it is highly powerful to hear the names. They were in the K's a little while ago, and they must have read, and this is New York City, so they must have read off a list of when they got down to the Kellys as the last name. There were probably 25 or 30 people with the last name of Kelly. And as they continued to read, Frank Kelly, Joe Kelly, Marion Kelly, Nancy Kelly, uh, it kind of hits home that the sheer enormity of how many people were affected. And these people, put yourself in that place. If we can't have empathy for these people who now have become not human beings, but symbols of remembrance of this day. And it's force fed, but it's by necessity. But it's like, okay, we've got to constantly remind you because no one's thinking about this. And if I was one of those family members, that's how I would feel as well. We've just moved on, and I'm going to get to part B of this in just a moment. Where have we arrived since then? But as you read these names, these people who have become symbolic with this day and their humanity was taken away from them, and the memory of them as people fades over time. But as you hear the names, just if you can't have empathy and think about them as human beings coming to work on that beautiful Indian summer Tuesday in New York, already thinking about the phone calls they had to make that day, the reports they had to get in, all of the regular pursuits of their life and their livelihood, thinking about where am I going to go to lunch, thinking about, okay, this afternoon it's going to be great. I'm getting together with a couple of friends for some beers after work. I've got to go pick up my kid from school, perhaps, go to little league practice, or it was just beginnings of football season. So maybe, when I was a dad on a Tuesday afternoon back in the day, you could find me right after work almost every single day at my son's football practices, standing with the other dads, talking about the issues of the day, talking about our boys and our teams. That's life. That's the pursuit of the life and liberty that we enjoy as Americans. And all of these things these people thought were thinking about, I don't think it's always in the back of your mind. Some kind of tragedy can befall all of us. I think we all understand we're day to day, but there is no way, no possible way that this could ever enter anybody's mind that this was going to be the outcome and that they were literally down to their last hour or two of existence and would be forever memorialized as a symbol of what happened on that day, as opposed to the legacy of their humanity. And it just strikes me that there are people that you talk to that says, I can't even watch any of the 9/11 stuff. I mean, if you are a human being you have to have empathy, because empathy is the identification of the feelings and the pain and the exhilaration of others. And empathy is one of the most important human qualities. And if you can't put yourself in those shoes today and think about how these lives were cut short, think about all of the guys and women who responded to this that also are being memorialized on this list. They were doing their job of going in and try and restore stability and save as many people as possible. And when those towers collapsed, so many of those people perished, and those families were left without their loved ones. I mean, the impact of this is just astounding and impossible to comprehend. And it leads me to the second part of this, which what did we learn from this? What were the original images of what we saw as a country? We saw that night on the Capitol steps people in Congress and staffers and senators and representatives holding hands, singing "God Bless America," in a unified display of the outrage of that this country was feeling and the sorrow at the loss of so many of our fellow citizens. But what happened after that? The hand clasps broke loose. Everybody went their own direction, and instead of remembering this and being in a period of sorrow and resolve that this shall never happen again, we are going to unite and make this country what it's supposed to be. All this division, and where is it leading us? We find ourselves 22 years later, probably in a worse state of divisiveness, because there were people that saw this not as a tragedy, not as a terrible abomination, aberration. They saw this as opportunity. And it became an opportunity for people who dream of a mighty plutocracy, a professional class, a, 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 a business class, money and power and control, the things I talk about all the time. The Patriot Act was initiated, which at the time seemed like a good idea to protect our citizens. The Department of Homeland Security, all of the different agencies, all of the extra expenditure of your tax money, seemingly for good purposes, all of it's been hijacked to strengthen the central government grip on the country. The Patriot Act is used to spy on our own citizens. Even a presidential candidate in 2016, a bogus report that he was somehow tied up with Russians, which is the ultimate capitalist, being in league with the nefarious communists, was such a ridiculous premise to start with. And it's all been disproven. The Democrats like to say, well, that's been debunked. That's their word for it. Nobody's even looked at any of this, but we're dismissing it because it's not convenient to our agenda. The Trump situation on the Russian collusion has been exhaustively examined by people that would like nothing more than to find links to that complete lie that was used by our government to secure warrants to spy on a presidential candidate and spy on a new incoming president in the early days of his administration. It was completely taken in a different direction. And here we are, 22 years later. Remember the other image, just 12 hours after this happened, George W. Bush, our president, went to the site against the advice of many because it was unsafe and unstable. There was noxious gases. There was debris. It was a dangerous mission for any person. But George W. Bush, in his windbreaker with the presidential seal, arrived at that scene. First responders who had been working every minute since it had happened gathered round with other people down on the very face of the rubble. And George W. Bush, to project even better, climbed on top of the rubble, which had to have just unnerved his Secret Service people and all the people charged with his protection. He climbed to the top of the rubble with a bullhorn and addressed the American people and the despots that had committed this terrible act. That we will hunt you down and we will eliminate your existence because that's the only appropriate response. And that leadership, those guts, that complete seizure of the moment to stand up and say, we're not going to stand for this, and call it out for exactly what it was without political implications, without thoughts of, how is this going to strengthen the position of the philosophy we have or our agenda. This guy responded as a leader has to respond. What would happen today, folks? Here we are 22 years later. What would happen today if something like this happened? What would our current president do? Uh, First of all, they would have to wake him up to tell him that this occurred. Second of all, this is not a person who would ever go to a place like this where there's still danger. We had the derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, back in February. The president has still not yet gone to that site using the excuse that he's too busy. This is a person that's already been away from the White House more than half of the days of this year. I think I said last week on the show, wouldn't you like to have 100 vacation days a year? But he says they're not vacation days. He's working when he's at his beach place in Delaware, a beach house, a mansion that he has, along with another one in Wilmington, Delaware, a different spot where this is a public servant. This is good old Joe. This is the lowest compensated guy in all of Congress, according to him. And he's got $1 million estates in duplicate. This is a guy that is not a leader. He's the elected leader of the country through very questionable circumstances, but he is not running the show. He's not cognitively capable of running the show. They point him in the right direction. They send him out and hope he doesn't say something terrible that will damage their agenda. But these are people running this country now that you did not elect, you did not choose, and there is no leadership. There is no thought of the safety and security of American people. When our border is wide open, 6 to 7 million people have come in. And guess what? 144 people have been accosted in the last year at the border that were on the terrorist watch and no-fly lists. That's the 144 that we've caught. How many of the 7 million people that have gotten into this country, I would say probably 10 times with a conservative estimate of the people that we've actually caught at the border that cannot be allowed to come into this country under any circumstances, are now roaming free, anonymously being able to operate. How soon is it going to be till the next one of these tragedies? And maybe it won't be at the airport because we've spent millions of dollars to go through sophisticated machines so they can take a bottle of water away from you. That's their big accomplishment. I was flying Friday and kept hearing the announcement, firearms are not legal at TSA security areas. No kidding. That's a real revelation. But the bottom line is we may, I emphasize, have a system that might prevent our own transportation system from being weaponized. But what really died that day, along with all of those people, was the sense of invulnerability that all of us shared because we are bordered by oceans on either side and have always enjoyed domestic tranquility in terms of this kind of action and this kind of treachery and that we've experienced by watching the rest of the world. But this was a bitter dose of reality that we're vulnerable. And when we allow people to stream into this country unchecked, undocumented, and completely anonymously, and are wandering around, what's going to be the next target? Maybe it won't be an airplane. Maybe it'll be a water supply somewhere poisoned, or maybe how about a release of a toxic disease? They've already done that. The bottom line is, where are we now compared to where we were that day when we were exploited and we experienced the ultimate treachery and despair? And that's what I want us to remember today, that we need to get control of our own ship back. We need a leader in the head of the government. We don't need an aged puppet career politician who is so corrupt. I'll conclude with this. George Stephanopoulos a week ago on his ABC Sunday morning show said it's just astounding that Donald Trump, with all of his baggage, is tied with our current president in polling for who they would vote for in the election. How can this be? This is a person that's indicted. How can he be tied with this president? Well, here's how Mr. Stephanopoulos, a very, by the way, nonpartisan, objective observer in the modern day media, another disturbing aspect of our current day lives. We don't have journalists anymore. We have partisans spewing the party line on all sides. And it's another thing that is a topic for a different day. But to say Trump has baggage, we saw Trump's 4 years in the White House. We had economic growth and boom times. I mean, things were going great. Trump reestablished our country as a tremendous force in the world through strength. And now you've got an administration that has unraveled all of that. We were completely energy independent. Now we are begging the worst regimes in the world for fossil fuels because we refuse to produce any, to kowtow to the far left progressive movement who would not support anyone who did not just sign on to their ridiculous agenda. I mean, there's way too many things to lay out here. But the bottom line is to suggest that Donald Trump has baggage. Joe Biden has steam trunks worth of baggage. It would take a long line of carts to even be able to wheel those up. This is a guy whose family has exploited his positions all these years, collected millions of dollars from our enemies and hostile states around the world to wield influence that Joe Biden has had as a senator and a vice president. There is no family business for the Bidens. We've got the bank records. We have the indications of millions of dollars in proceeds. And the Bidens don't have a product. They don't have a service. They don't have any expertise. They have good old Uncle Joe, Joe American, Joe Biden, who had worked his way somehow to the vice presidency, control of policy in China and Ukraine, and has profited handsomely because of it. It's the ultimate form of bribery described in the Constitution, and it is an outrage. And baggage, that's beyond baggage. Not to mention the fact that at 82, and you can't put a number on age because there are people like William Shatner, who's in his 90s, who's still hosting his own TV shows and is still sharp as a tack. I'm working currently with a businessman who's 88 years old, that is his mental acuity is absolutely unbelievable. But Joe Biden, sadly, is not in that category. This is a guy right now who's in India. Last night came down for the only Q&A on this World Economic Summit that he was going to permit on this trip, that his handlers are going to permit. Joe goes where he's told and has to be placed physically in places. You sit here, Mr. President. You move this direction, Mr. President. Here's your card of what to say, Mr. President. And here's your card of the 5 people they allowed with the world media crammed in this room. They called on 5 specific people, and they had already rehearsed with those people what the softball question was going to be, and to make sure that the president, who is so insulated, he doesn't even know what's going on, doesn't hear questions from the rest of the media shouted as he walks away. They blared loud music as they physically took his elbows and led him out of the room. And the media shouted their questions fruitlessly because they don't even want our president, your elected leader, to even hear what the people really want to know, because, it might lead him to ask questions about how they're handling him. It's a situation that you could never have imagined 22 years ago, as we remember these 3,000 souls who were living their lives and had them cut short because of geopolitical and ancient ideological treachery. And it is what we have to remember now, that in their memory, we are sullying those memories by allowing our country to unravel into this ridiculous situation that we're all faced with now of letting people stroll into this country undocumented and anonymously do whatever they want to do, and supplementing with your tax dollars a lot of people that have a lot of intentions to create harm and discontent and disarray in this country. So that's it for this week. These are things I am certain you needed to know if you hadn't put it in this perspective. I'm not bitter. I'm not angry. I am full of regret and sorrow for the lives lost today, but it really strengthens my resolve, as it should all Americans, to get our ship righted and start going in the right direction to be a sign of morality and right in this universe, while we protect our own citizens and prioritize them first over a political agenda. Thanks for tuning in. Don't miss Keefer and Kurre this week. We will have a great subject, as we always do. And, of course, we're on Saturday morning, the starting lineup, college football going strong. We've got great shows each and every week, ABC 3340, 10:30 a.m. Do not miss it this Saturday. Kip and Tony and our great starting lineup. Thank you, everybody. Have a great week. God bless America, and God bless the lost souls from this day 22 years ago.
This has been a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.